My name is Anna. I'm 31 years old. I'm a landscape architect in Seattle. I design gardens for a living, which means I spend a lot of time thinking about what grows and what doesn't, and what the soil was hiding all along. I want to tell you about a man named Daniel, and about the woman I met in a grocery store on a Saturday afternoon, who changed everything I thought I knew about him and about me. She was in the cereal aisle. She had an Ikat tote bag over one shoulder, and she was reading the back of a box of granola. When she looked up and noticed me, I noticed her noticing me. Something shifted in her expression, not quite recognition, but the beginning of it, like she was placing me in a context she hadn't expected. I didn't know who she was yet. I had no idea that she was about to become the most important stranger I would ever meet in a grocery store. I met Daniel at a friend's dinner party 8 months earlier. He was warm and funny, and a little quieter than the rest of the room. On our second date, he told me his wife had passed away 2 years before, a car accident. He said her name was Claire. He said he had been trying to find his way back to being a person who could be present with someone. I felt the weight of what he was carrying. I was careful with him because of it. We moved slowly, which I thought was because of grief. He didn't push and I didn't push. He was thoughtful and present in the way I hadn't experienced in a long time. He asked good questions. He listened. He said he felt like himself again with me. He said that carefully, like he wasn't sure he was allowed to feel it yet. I thought that was grief. I thought I was watching someone find their way back. There were weekends he wasn't available. He said he visited his wife's family sometimes, that he felt he owed it to them to stay connected, to honor her memory. I thought that was love, the lasting kind. He was private about his apartment. We always spent time at mine. He said his place still had too much of her in it. I thought that was grief. I thought I was being understanding. I was actually being useful. It was a Saturday in March, ordinary afternoon, ordinary grocery list. I was in a good mood. Daniel and I had had dinner the night before. We had talked about maybe traveling together in the summer. He had said the word maybe, and I had decided not to push it. I was thinking about whether to get the pasta or the rice when I turned into the cereal aisle, and a woman with an Ikat tote bag looked up from a box of granola. She said, "I'm sorry, I think I know who you are." Her voice was careful, not angry, not cold, just very, very careful. I said, "Oh, I don't think we've met." She said, "We haven't, but I've seen your photo on my husband's phone." I stood there for a moment, holding my basket. I said, I'm sorry, your husband." She nodded. She said his name. She said, "Daniel." I put my basket down on the floor, not carefully. It just went down. I said, "He told me his wife died 2 years ago, a car accident. He said her name was Claire." She looked at me for a long time. Then she said very quietly, "My name is Diane. We've been married for 6 years, and I am very much alive." That was the moment the entire story I had been living inside turned inside out. We went to the cafe next door. I'm not sure who suggested it. We sat across from each other with untouched coffees between us, and we talked for 2 hours. Diane had found my photo on Daniel's phone 3 weeks earlier. She had spent those 3 weeks deciding what to do with what she knew. She said she had chosen to find me because she needed to understand the full picture, not for revenge, just to understand. I respected that immediately. What I kept coming back to in that cafe was the specific cruelty of the lie he had chosen. Not, I'm not married, not, it's complicated. He had invented a dead wife. He had given her a name, Claire. He had constructed a grief so detailed, so tender, that it had made me feel not suspicious, but protective of him. He hadn't just hidden Diane from me, he had used the idea of her death to make me feel like the one thing he needed most. That was not carelessness, that was design. After 2 hours, Diane and I exchanged numbers. She left first. I sat for another 20 minutes before I called Daniel. He picked up on the second ring. He sounded normal, easy. He said, "Well, hey, what are you up to?" I said, "I just had coffee with Diane." The silence on his end was very different from any silence I had heard from him before. It was the silence of someone who has been trying to outrun something and has just heard it arrive. He didn't deny it. He said, "Anna, I can explain." I said, "You invented a dead wife." He said, "I know." I said, "You named her." He said, "I know." There wasn't much left to say after that. Some things are not complicated by additional information. Some things are only what they are. I told him not to contact me. I hung up and stood on the street in the Seattle rain for a while, which felt appropriate. What I hadn't expected was the guilt, not toward Daniel, toward Diane. I had spent 8 months with her husband. I had been the reason he had a plausible story. For the weekends he was gone, I had been, without knowing it, part of the architecture of her betrayal. She had been kind to me in that cafe. She had not looked at me with blame, but I looked at myself with it, because I needed someone to be angry at, and the only person left to receive it was me. Diane texted me that evening, just one message. She said, "What he did to you was the same thing he did to me. You don't get to carry blame for that." I read it several times. I don't know how she found the clarity to write that. She was sitting inside her own version of the same wreckage, and she had found the presence of mind to release someone else from guilt. That took something I am not sure I could have managed in her position. Psychologists describe what Daniel did as mythomania, pathological lying so elaborate and consistent that the liar begins to experience their own fabrications as emotionally true. He hadn't just told me a story, he had built himself a character to inhabit, the widower finding his way back to love, and he had lived inside that character so completely that his grief felt real to me, because in some way it felt real to him. The lie wasn't a cover story, it was an identity, and I had loved the identity, without ever meeting the person. The hardest thing was not the anger. Anger is clean, it has a direction. The hardest thing was the memories. 8 months of what felt like genuine connection, conversations that mattered, moments I had kept. Were they real? My answer after everything is Nikai. The moments were real. My feelings were real. What was not real was the person I was having them with. He had borrowed my sincerity for a story that was always entirely his. Diane had 6 years in that marriage. I had 8 months. I think about the difference in weight that represents. She made her own decision about what to do with her marriage. I won't say what it was. it isn't mine to share. What I will say is that she handled the whole thing with a dignity I found genuinely remarkable. She had been lied to in a way most people never experience, and she remained, throughout, a person I would have been glad to know in any other circumstance. I go back to my work when I don't know what else to do. Landscape architecture is good for that. The soil doesn't lie about what will grow in it. The light doesn't pretend to come from a direction it doesn't. You can design something beautiful, and if you've read the conditions honestly, it will live. If you've been told the wrong things, eventually the plants show you. They always do. I think about Daniel sometimes. As a project, I misread the soil on, not because it was my fault, because I was working from false data. I want to ask you something. When someone tells you they're in pain and you respond with care and openness, and then you find out that the pain was constructed, designed to open exactly those doors in you, does that make you wish you had been less open? My answer is no, because the alternative is to stop extending care to people who genuinely need it, and I'm not willing to pay that price. But I'm curious what you think. Before you go, if you have ever been the person who didn't know, not the wife, not the girlfriend, who knew and stayed, but the one who had no idea, who was operating on entirely false information, who gave real love to a situation that was entirely manufactured. I want you to hear this clearly. You were not naive. You were not foolish. You were someone who took another person at their word. That is not a flaw. That is what it looks like to be a person who trusts. The flaw belongs to the one who made that trust a tool. Not to you, never to you.